welcome back to the Kingsway Podcast.
Welcome.
We're here. We're doing a regular.
Yep, the most regular thing we've ever done.
We're back. We're back.
I'm thinking that if you're listening to this right now, if I have the power and the time, we're going to be releasing two things simultaneously.
Whoop, whoop.
We're going to be releasing this episode.
Normal podcast stuff.
Yep, and it's everywhere. Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube.
All that junk.
We also took a break from our Chosen review series, and we tried a new thing.
We did.
And you can judge for yourself if you like it.
But you're only going to find it on YouTube.
Yes, it is a YouTube-only thing, and it's because it's a reaction video rather than a, recap summary
We're trying to be cool. All right, we're trying to be cool.
We're trying to have, middle schoolers respect us, but
Yes.
I don't know that there's any way for that to happen.
I think
It's just our best attempt.
Well, it was a thought process around making it easier, and then I don't think it was easier. I think it ended up being much harder. So we're learning.
Yep.
However, if you really like it, we need to know that, because if it is a little bit more work and stuff, but you really enjoy.
Yeah.
And what makes it different is it actually is a video of us watching an episode simultaneously reacting in lifetime.
Rather than just talking about what we saw 30 minutes ago.
Yes. Rather than watching it and then coming on and just talking. So let us know if you like that better. But this is not that.
Nope.
This is something completely, it's normal, but it's our regular kind of reflections on Sunday's sermon through the Gospel of Matthew. And we are trying to get back on that train. We're trying to finish it, honestly.
Yes.
Hopefully by the end of the summer, we'll be completely done. Not because we're trying to rush through it, but it's like we've been on it for almost 2 years, on and off. I think it's time. We just need to make it. We need to make it through.
Every time we pick a gospel, it's around for a couple years.
It is.
And we've picked two gospels back to back.
And we got to finish them. No, I'm just kidding.
Or not back to back, but pretty close.
Pretty close. We're in chapter 15 of Matthew. We are...
Yeah, can you just read the section title?
Yeah, it's the Canaanite woman, the faith of the Canaanite woman, and then the feeding of the 4,000.
Okay, and we've actually just a couple chapters earlier finished the feeding of the 5,000.
Yes.
So Jesus has now fed 9,000 men and their wives and kids.
Yes. It is a lot of bread and fish.
So much bread. Carb City.
Carb City is
Eat
right.
fresh. So we do these episodes so that we can review the stuff that we have talked about already, but then also dive deeper. And because we already preached on it, but not everything fits in the sermon. And so in 90 seconds, or a minute and 30 seconds for you minute abiders, I'm going to have Trevor summarize what he preached, and then we're going to dig a little deeper.
In perfect unity and form.
Yep. You ready?
Sure.
3, 2, 1, go.
Most stressful thing ever. This section is probably one of the sneakiest fun sections I've preached in a long time. It's about the faith of a Canaanite woman that shows up. If you don't know what a Canaanite is, it's basically the person that was there before Israel showed up in that geographical region. That means that they are the conquered people, and the Jews, of course, now are being conquered or have been conquered by the Romans. So it's this weird hierarchy. And so this woman comes up and recognizes Jesus as the Lord, Son of David, which is the Messiah. And it's so weird. A conquered person would call the king of basically the conquerors her Lord. And then Jesus kind of does this really cool Yoda thing and walks her through. I am not here for you. I'm here for the children of Israel, and she needs help. Her daughter is in terrifying state. It says she's demon-possessed and is suffering. And Jesus says, I'm not here for your daughter. I'm here for the children of Israel. And why would I give the scraps of food for my children to you, the dogs? Wildly confusing at the surface, but basically what Jesus does is he draws this woman's faith out in front of his disciples, because at the very end of the section, she goes, I know, but even the dogs would get some scraps from their master's table. And at that, Jesus reveals the whole time that he saw her heart and her faith. And this is one of two instances in the entire Gospels where a woman is called a great faith, and the centurion, so the Roman and the Canaanite, great faith. not his disciples. And right after that, we find the crowds, and he feeds them all, and we are in the crowds, and the crowds now have to decide, are they going to have faith like the Pharisees at the beginning of the chapter, or are they going to have faith like the Canaanite that chooses to humble themselves and trust him as Lord?
Yeah. That's it.
That's it.
Okay. Great episode. We'll see you guys next week.
Yeah. It was a incredibly complex section because it really does have a really harsh tone on the surface.
Yes.
On the surface.
Yeah. That's the thing that stuck out to me first is how harsh it sounds. And I mentioned this in our preaching meeting. Different people have interpreted this section differently. Well, that maybe saying different a lot isn't surprising. But it's so jarring that people have taken different stances on this. Some as confident to say that Jesus really does fall in line with Peter and John and some of the people who want to call the outsiders racist. Dogs. But just like he's surprised. He's holding on to his like fundamentals about the faith, or he's like, my father hasn't dispatched me for you, and so I'm going to ignore you. But then she pesters him enough and he finally
gives in.
Rather than the way you talked about it, which was like he's like grinning and smirking and sees her faith behind her face and is like digging that out for his disciples to see. Those are two options.
Yep.
There's even a third option.
Yep.
That is like, so that first option I mentioned is Jesus being strong about what his father's commanded him to do and what's right and inclusive in the kingdom of God so far.
Yep.
And that he changes his mind in like, or he shows mercy where his father didn't tell him to, which is kind of weird.
That is weird.
The third option is he was wrong.
Yeah.
And I've heard there's a pretty liberal, I'm saying liberal not as like Betty voted for Biden, but liberal is like liberal theology.
Yeah.
A lot more loose and open, and you can interpret the text to mean whatever you think it means within reason.
And this is the one that you said he was like repenting of his racism.
Yeah.
My gosh. So weird. Yeah.
So we already know like from other stories in the Gospels that they hated Samaritans.
Yep.
They were like half-breeds. They were the children of Israelites, the people who were in, and of whoever they were captured by, Babylon or Assyria whatever
it is.
They had intermarried, and now they're this like mutant thing.
They have
They're
no
like,
homeland.
Yeah. They've tarnished their belonging by not by being with those who don't belong. Well, Canaanites are just fully out.
Yep.
They're
No
not
discussion.
not even masquerading as people who are in. So like the woman at the well is a Samaritan.
Yep.
You see that relationship play out. Where are we going to worship? Your temple with the real, like fully inclusive people of God, fully DNA Ancestry.com tested, or in where we worship in Samaria with the half-breeds and whatever. This person's fully out.
Yep.
And still.
Yeah, and that's
so the interpretation that guy offers is Jesus was racist and then repents of his racism after he sees this woman's faith, but judges her harshly and has to be forgiven. And I'm like, whoa.
I just, the way that to me just seems so ridiculously wrong, but I have to listen more to that to maybe, I just think that's a way
it's in a reel. So it's in like 60 seconds.
Jeez.
It's not hours to.
It's wild. It's wild that would be their interpretation. And again, that's why A.W. Tozer says what you think of when you think of God is the most important thing about you, because you have an image that you're building in your mind of what God looks like, sounds like, how he acts, how he thinks. And it's finite because you are not able to hold the full picture. And so it can shift and it can become clear or hazy and the tone shifts. And that's why I think this is so easy. I would actually say this is like one of the most psychologically revealing verses that you read, because you will read how you view Jesus into this text very easily. And so if you read this text as an angry parent talking to a child that spilled milk, or if you read this text as a police officer telling someone they broke the law, it becomes very dangerous.
Things that are unseen based off of things that we have seen. I think that's an easier way to put it.
The way I wanted to talk about it on Sunday, but I couldn't do it fully comically because I don't have a good Yoda impression. But when I don't, and my mind doesn't work it already messes things up backwards, so I should be able to do it easily, but I can't. But when Luke arrives on the planet to talk to Yoda for the first time,
This is Star Wars, by the way, if you're totally lost.
Listen,
not lost.
Lore, all right? You can go look this up. And it's a silly illustration, but basically he knows that there's a great Jedi on that planet, and he's got to go there to find him, but he doesn't know what he looks like. And so when he shows up there and he meets Yoda, he just thinks he's some natural inhabitant of this planet and doesn't know that he's the great master. And so Yoda is secretly aware that Luke is a Jedi, but doesn't reveal himself right away. And so they have these conversations. And to me, this is kind of that similar, like she immediately recognizes who Jesus is. And I think Jesus immediately recognizes the depth of her faith, but also sees that she knows there is a big gap between her being worthy of that grace and mercy, and she doesn't know if she's going to get it. Like she's like, I fully admit I don't deserve to get what I'm asking for.
Yeah.
I don't fit inside your plan. I haven't been able to worship at your places. I know that you see me as less. Every person in this entire nation has told me I'm a dog from the very beginning. And what I love the most is when you think about this, and this is the way I viewed it, and this is the way I taught it, and I think it was very helpful for me, is I love the way you said it. Like this woman's crying out is what the verses say. And the disciples, it describes two things. It says Jesus didn't answer her. And then the disciples told him to tell her to go away. And in my mind, I picture Jesus hearing this woman and then all of a sudden seeing her heart. And the pause there, I think, is incredibly, like things unsaid are just as important as things said. When he doesn't respond, I feel like he's trying to let that racism boil up in his disciples.
Yeah.
I think he's giving it space to come to froth. And then he says the things that I think all his disciples would have wanted to say. We're not here for you. We're not here for you.
Which he did say that earlier, but he's like, but he doesn't say, I'm not here for you.
No.
He says, I was only sent to.
Yep, the lost sheep of Israel.
Yeah.
And then she says, help me.
Yeah.
Lord, just help me. Admitting she's lost.
Yeah.
And then Jesus says, one of the harshest statements I think I've ever read him say to a foreigner non-believer. He says harsh things to the Pharisees, but man, it seems harsh. He says, why would I give you food for the children? Why would I give food for children to dogs? And then he answers with probably one of the most harshest things. And it's, this answer at face value, I think what I pictured in my mind was her hearing that and have heard that her whole life. Like she's heard that her whole life. And that's not something that's new to her. That's not, and all of the disciples would have leaned in and gone, yeah. And her response is that is something she has repeated to herself, that she has thought before, that she has hoped in, and that she is hoping in now. Even the dogs get scraps from the master's table. She is hoping just the proximity to the master is all it's going to take, that maybe something will fall off, that she'll get a little bit of this. And it's as if in that moment, he's just so, I picture Aslan, like just a Jesus figure, or even the Chosen, of just like the way his smile would just go ear to ear, and he would go, what faith. Oh my goodness. And then he would turn to his disciples and go, do you see it? Yeah. Do you see it? Like, do you see this faith? And, of course she's like, what did I say? Like, did I get it right? Did I, and then he says, you have great faith. What you have asked is done. And at that very minute, her daughter is healed, which I didn't get to say this on Sunday. And I thought this was really, really important, but it's always hard to talk about. Like, one, she comes and asks for mercy, not on herself, but on her child. So she's not asking for mercy on herself. She's asking for a child. And then in the end, it's not the faith of the child that heals her. It's the faith of her mother. And so it's this weird bionic connection, symbiotic connection between the two that ends up being the healing property is not just of the faith of the girl, but the faith of the of the mother. And so here's what's so crazy. The thought process around her daughter being sick is a false pretense that her sins and her troubles have caused her daughter's brokenness.
Yeah.
And so she's coming thinking that she's the guilty party for why her daughter is this way. It's not explicitly said in the text, but it's understood as like your sins can affect the people around you in a real way, especially parent to children. And we know that is true, if a dad's an alcoholic or a mom's, a drug addict, or, they have like that honestly has physical, environmental things. But they took it another level and said spiritual, like psychological.
Let's talk about that for a second, because there are other times in the New Testament, and especially in the Gospels, where demon possession is named. That is what is named in the Gospel account. And we will sometimes, as modern Westerners, say, yep, that's demon possession. But in this one, we specifically said, it seems like she has something that may be demon influenced, but maybe they just didn't know what it was, and this was their best attempt to write it down. Why the distinction here?
Well, the distinction for me is the second line. It's demon possession and suffering terribly. And so to me, it seems to be something that, like, for example, when Jesus runs into the man that's got all the demons in him and he's got these chains and he can't be held, that could be seen as a psycho event, or like, some sort of like psychosis or split personality. But more than likely, it seems like it's something that he has been taken over, and like oppressed.
Yeah.
This seems to be something that a physical ailment that is causing suffering in the person. Now, I'm not here to take it and just throw away that there's not spiritual forces or some things that can be oppressing in that way. But I'm also not one that's just like depression is just a lack of faith. So like, I'm not going to go down that road either. I think there's real legitimate reasons, and we have made advances in science. And I think anytime you look closer at creation, you see that there's design. That's why mathematics is so amazing, because anytime you solve a mathematical problem, it's been there all along. But
You're
anyway,
just discovering it.
And I think that's part of this. It's like you have to go with what you know and what you see and what you perceive. And so this is what they see and perceive and what they know. And so this is what they declare. And it's not because they've made some grandiose mistake. It's because they're using the things they have to make the
language they have.
Yes. And
they don't know about the DSM-5.
No.
They don't know about psychoactive drugs that can be used in a pharmaceutical way to help you in whatever.
They don't.
So one specific textual reason that I remember us going down this route is not us disbelieving the Bible, but us looking at the very last verse. Jesus said to her, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed.
Yep.
Not exorcised.
Yep.
But it was like the affliction was the thing. And maybe it looked spazzy. Maybe it looked out of control, and that would lead somebody to the demon oppression conclusion,
and that's
whatever.
That's what's so wild. So here's the thing: her pretense is wrong. Like, she hasn't caused this thing; it's just happening to her daughter. So she comes with a request, and it's hilarious that we often go to Jesus asking for something that really isn't. She's broken. She's lost. You know what I mean? But it's not her fault that her daughter's. Now, she's got other things in her life that I'm sure she's got reasons to feel that way. But in the end, Jesus also redeems her daughter through her faith. And that is wild to me. That doesn't always happen. That's not something that I would ever preach as like a guaranteed manipulation of God, where you have to come in with authentic and then God always shows up. Because the thing I like to remind people of is that daughter got sick and died again. Like, or that daughter, she didn't stay alive.
Or hurt.
Or got hurt. You know what I mean? So even if that one thing is removed, it's not like the suffering is removed forever. And so Jesus is more concerned with her faith than he is about fixing all the physical ailments in the world. And
that's one of the reasons that things like this are called signs and wonders, along with miracles. They're not just about doing the miraculous, and then the miraculous is the only thing that'll ever happen.
Yeah.
It is partially fully to heal and to help and to love that person, and simultaneously fully to show off who Jesus is and the kingdom that he's bringing, which will preempt, kind of expect Revelation 21.
Yes.
All things will be made new. No more crying, sickness, death, pain. He'll wipe away every tear from their eye. It's like a little window into those moments. It'll be undone, and the chaos of the world will come back over that person and they'll die at some point.
And
but
so, yeah, that's exactly
it's a window.
It is, and that's why the next section is so important. And I meant to mention this on Sunday. That's why I always like that I have a second chance. And when I get to the shower after preaching, and I'm like, dang it, why didn't I say that? So one of the things that occurred at the garden in the cursing is that man will have to toil to make his own food and to make his own way. And so
it's more specifically about farming rather than processing and whatever. But absolutely,
they're going to have to grind out this thing rather than a tree just giving it to them. And so when you read the feeding of the 5,000 and the 4,000, what you don't hear, and maybe I should have said, and now you're hearing it, is you see God doing what he did in the garden. No longer do they have to toil. No longer do they have to figure it out.
For this one moment.
For this one moment, God takes care of all their needs, and they're immediately met.
And also what it makes me wonder is that a feeding of the children at which the Syrophoenician woman, the Canaanite woman, came and ate crumbs from? Like, did she follow him there?
I guarantee you she got some. I don't know if she got one of the baskets. Maybe she got one. She's going to probably check on her daughter. That's what I'm thinking. But
that's happening.
But at the same time, it's such a cool thing because it does say he left there, he went to this other place, and he had compassion on the crowds. He was healing everybody, so everybody was, and it says signs and wonders in there. It's not like it's saying this is a larger display. And then this is such a like foreshadowing, and then also a precursor that's from the manna of them traveling in the desert and God taking care of them daily. And I talk about that. It's not daily. It's daily bread, not weekly bread, not yearly bread. It's daily bread, and this is just one opportunity for them to see a revealing of what God would do is take them day by day through each day, what their needs are.
So there's a thread that I want to pull on that we haven't touched yet, I don't think, which is the fact that in Matthew's account, he calls her the Canaanite woman. And in Mark's account, and if there are any other accounts, I'm pretty sure they're all the same. Just Mark. He calls her the Syrophoenician woman.
Yep.
Could be two different experiences, two different stories, but they're nearly identical in content other than the name of
the conversation is almost identical.
Yep. And so I want to talk about that a little bit.
So that's a area up off the sea. I forget. I think the Sea of Jordan. But it's
very north.
It's a very north area. It's right along the coast. I think it's more of just like the detail of like which author. I think for me, why I think Matthew leaves it Canaanite is because he's talking about kingdom stuff.
Yeah.
So this is the kingdom before.
And actually, so I was just reading Wikipedia. That is where I get all my good information. No, it's not. But just trying to refresh myself on like, what's the difference between these two? Because they're both foreign to me. Well, Mark calls her the Syrophoenician woman because she's from the very north near like Tyre and Sidon and like way outside of the normal Jewish territory. I thought that would be full Gentile, but it's
Greek.
Samaritan
Greek.
So she would have been possibly. This is the land that the tribe of Asher had, but that was a long time ago.
That's a long time ago.
They're not thriving right now. And so even though that was land formerly held by them, that's like where she comes from now is not a place that is known by Jewish terms.
Absolutely.
All those nations got crushed.
It'd be like Native Americans nowadays. Like they're like, you go from Mohawk or you go whatever. It's like that might have been where their tribe was a long, long time ago, but now, that's that's like Oklahoma City now. You know what I mean? Like
but that place does exist, and those people do exist. Who does not exist right now is the Canaanites. They do not exist in first century Palestine, first century Israel, whatever, that whole area. And so what Matthew's been doing this entire gospel is talking to an audience who's very familiar with the Hebrew Bible, with the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, and then, of course, a bunch of stuff later. And the way he's telling the Jesus story is matching up with the Israel story, except for totally faithful the whole time. And so we've talked about it, I think, a couple of times, but like he is born and then him and his family flee around Egypt. That sounds like the flight from Egypt to escape slavery, or the Joseph story, fleeing to Egypt to escape famine. Whatever. And crossing the Red Sea is like being baptized in the Jordan. He goes in, he gets dunked, he comes back out. And the temptation in the desert is like the 40 years of wandering, yada, yada, yada. There's a lot of lineups between this. So Matthew brings up a group of people who don't exist but are infamous
Yep.
in the Hebrew Bible.
In the story.
And like you said, these are the people who used to exist in the place where Israel exists.
Yep.
And then Israel came in under divine command from God to then live there.
Yep.
Exactly what was commanded is sort of debated.
Uh-huh.
Did he say just live there? Did he say kick them out? Or did he say kill everybody?
Yep.
Obviously, they didn't kill everybody. If
Nope.
this was a Canaanite woman, I'm thinking it's more metaphorical. But anyway, but Canaanites are synonymous with idolatry
Yep.
and worshiping other gods,
Yep.
which are kind of the same thing. And that's like who they are.
Yep.
So he names her a Canaanite woman because Jesus is doing what Israel should have done
Yep.
in the whole gospel story.
Yes.
And so Jesus comes to this Canaanite woman, and yes, the mission of God that he has been sent for at this exact moment does not constitute him stopping everything and helping her. Maybe. Where he's like putting up an eyebrow. He knows about the Holy Spirit. He's met him before. And he knows that the book of Acts is going to happen, sort of. He has some hints at least. And so he knows that the message and the salvation and the blessing is going to go out to all people like it should have with Abraham.
Yep.
It should have. That's a really important section, actually, for this right here, is that Genesis 10 is the descendants of Noah, and it's called the Table of Nations because it goes down and says, like, Shem had a bunch of kids, and one was Egypt. And you're like, that's a place, not a kid.
Not a
but
kid.
that's how groups of people work,
Yep.
at least in parts of the
Yeah.
Old Testament. So, like, Jacob is later named Israel and has 12 sons, and those turn into the 12 tribes. So, like, it's not uncommon to see this. This is God showing, hyperlinking to the Egypt you know now as a reader in ancient times. Yeah, so, like, between our time and their time, Jesus' time. Hyperlinking, hey, Shem or whoever had Egypt wasn't a great guy because he had Egypt and another one named Cain again, and maybe for Canaanites. And anyway, it's in one way talking about all these nations that were born, and another way talking about God disinheriting the nations. So there's all these nations born out of all these people, and then chapter 11 is the Tower of Babel, at which God disinherits the nations after they try to do the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thing again and reach up to where he is with the tower. God confuses their languages and sends them all out, whatever, and scatters them. And then talks about how they are no longer his. He will actually save for himself a very tiny population through which, well, that population was just Abraham.
Yeah.
Well, Abram at that time. And he sends them out.
That's Adam idea. One person will.
Yeah. Through one person, Abram, who is 100 years old before he has a kid, and then somehow that turns into the entire nation of Israel.
Yep.
That's the story, is that the nations were disinherited
Yep.
at the Tower of Babel, and then through one man, the father of Israel,
Yep.
all the Pharisees try to call themselves sons of Abraham.
He's going to do it's the reverse thing. Rather than everybody getting up to God, he's going to go through one person to get everybody back to God.
Yeah. And he tries to bring everybody back through him. The whole promise is, I'm going to bless you, and anybody who curses you will be cursed, blesses you will be blessed. Through you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed.
Yep.
That goes very chaotic and very downward. But in Jesus, it's starting to come back upward.
Yep.
The Canaanites are absolutely not in the possession of God, finger quotes. They are a disinherited people, even if Matthew is talking metaphorically. Jesus is then going and doing God's work to take back the people.
And that's why it's such a powerful thing that what the first thing she said to me, it says to him, is Lord, son of David. And and you're like,
she's trying to belong to him again instead of to
and it's
the Gentile pagan gods instead of the Canaanite gods.
Yes, and it's like a triple entendre.
Yeah.
Like it's Lord, like God, son of David, which is the line of Abraham,
which is kingly,
but it's also son of David, prophetic, like Savior. And so it's like all three of these things at once are occurring, where she's honoring that Lord above all, your Yahweh, whatever that word is there. And then son of David is such a key line. She knows the history, she knows the stories, she knows who the son of David will be. the son of David will be the promise of Abraham, of David to the world.
Yeah.
And so she's calling out, basically, you promised. You said this is what you were going to do. Now, she also recognizes her unworthiness and that she's not worthy of all that. And I think that's what Jesus is testing, but it's not testing, I think, to like break her faith. I will probably go to my grave saying he is doing this for the benefit of everyone else around her, not necessarily for her. Like, I think for her, she's already resolute. She's already gotten there. She's screaming. Her daughter's dying. Like, she's decided she's all in. But he wants everyone else to see what faith looks like and what it will go through and what it will overcome to get to his feet.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, you want to talk about the opposite of the Tower of Babel, not high up to God, lower at his feet. God to us.
And that's the first sin is considering equality with God something to be grasped.
Yep.
Going to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and you won't surely die, but you'll be like God.
Yep.
And instead of that, going to her own gods, which are false and lesser and whatever, instead of doing all that, she goes to Jesus, God in flesh, for life.
Yep.
She's going for the tree of life, skipping the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Which there's a great quote I think Shane has in Between Two Trees, which is God-sized problems in human-sized hands tears the soul.
Yeah.
And that's the grabbing of the tree of the knowledge of God. It's that you know all that God knows, and it's too much, and you can't handle it, and it literally breaks you. It breaks and fractures your soul. So rather than doing that, she is handing everything back to Jesus. She's handing everything back to God and doing it in the face of opposition, in the face of what appears to be rejection, but really is just a resoluteness. And we talked about it, in the misplaced expectations. Like resilience is such an important part of faith. It's just stick-to-itness. Like that is the most important thing about success and faithfulness. Is just declaring, I'm going to keep taking the next step. I'm going to keep looking. It's a lamp to my feet, which is the next step, not the lamp to the whole path. And you can just tell she does that. I found it incredibly encouraging.
If you are listening to this right now or watching this and feel like that's a lot of conjecture, that's a lot of assertions, you're just saying stuff with conviction, but like, where's the proof that your interpretation of this tone is right? We can't absolutely prove it, but there's some like original language words that seem to show that Jesus is putting more emphasis on how lost the sheep of Israel are and less emphasis on how raggedy her dog self is. So, for instance, the lost sheep of Israel.
Yeah, and we said this.
It's a pretty harsh phrase. It's not just like, they're looking around and they haven't found their way home. It's not the Mount Vernon bulletin board on Facebook that's like, hey, does anybody know this white and black spotted dog? This is the 10th post about him. And
it just took over Facebook.
Yes, but it's like the destroyed ones of Israel is another relatively accurate translation.
Well, and the sheep concept would have been equally as insulting as the dog. Equally. I didn't say that in the sermon, but saying the lost sheep of Israel, of course, Jesus has called himself the good shepherd, and we know that he's using that as an illustration. But I was talking to Travis Hawk. That's who I was talking about in the sermon. I didn't quote him because I didn't ask, but I'll quote him here. He just has goats and like bottle goats and some sheep at his house. And he was just like, every time I hear that, it makes me, I just am insulted because how dumb sheep are.
Yeah.
Like he's like, I feel it in my bones. I'm like, I'm not that dumb. Well, it might be that dumb. Like
Sam Funderburg, who sings on stage, grew up with sheep and goats and whatever, and has given devotionals before that are like, sheep are dumb. That's like the whole thing.
Dumb.
Like, and he'll go into details about like I think he had a story one time where a sheep or a goat was giving birth, and like he had to catch the baby sheep or goat and then pull it away really quick because the mom was just gonna sit on it. He was like, "You just gave birth to this thing, you idiot!" Like, and that's he's so mad.
And I think we hear dog because sheep is white and cuddly, and like
Mary had a little lamb,
exactly.
And
we're good with it. But he insults Israel first, is I guess the point.
Yeah, I feel like my only context for dog is like Eastern European, Russian, sometimes Middle Eastern, as an insult. Like that's my only context for calling somebody a dog in that way, not DAWG like sup dog, but like, hey, you dog.
Yep.
Anyway, but the word he uses for dog there is pretty restrained.
Yeah.
And more like innocent dog or puppy or something along those lines, and not like flea ridden, licking your own butt. Like he's using a pretty mild,
soft term for what seems to be a very dirty or nasty animal at times.
So he's saying these things, and it's not wrong to say children and toss it to the dogs. But I think the tone is lost in the translation into English. It's like he's not using the harshest words he could be using for her.
No.
He is using some of the more harsh words he could use for Israel.
Yeah. Well, and
even if they're common, they're like
anytime, and we talked about this, I think a couple times on this podcast, but anytime, like, for example, when Jesus turns water to wine and you see him go, woman, it's not my time yet.
Yeah.
You know, like anytime a thing sticks out that way.
It again sounds very Eastern European,
and you're like,
Middle Eastern.
You know, like, oh my gosh, if I said that to my mom, I'd be in trouble. You know, like I'd be in big trouble. But then when you learn woman is a sign of devotion, and it's actually
that
more
specific word translated
specific
to English.
word is more translated to queen, and it's like
respected woman,
restoring royalty.
Yeah.
And so like when he's like, my queen, it's not my time yet. Like that, all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, that sounds a little different. And again, that's why the cultural things, the language things, and then you have to take every piece of Jesus' stuff to get the full picture. And so if something seems wildly out of character, wildly different than what he sounded like before, I mean, I take the woman at the well, and we talked about this in the last podcast, and if you read that with a certain tone, you can make Jesus sound really angry, like really mean. Like, go call your husband. You know what I mean? Oh yeah, you're right. You don't have a husband. And the man you're even with right now isn't, you know, like you can make him sound like a jerk.
Like he's wearing his leather jacket and he says, the man you're with right now isn't your husband. And the whole posse goes, oh,
yes.
Like that's sometimes the way we can read it.
We can read those though. And so I have to take what I know about Jesus and what I've read about Jesus and what I've seen about Jesus. I have to remember that he went in and he turned tables over in the temple to create space for Gentiles, space for Canaanites. That's where they could go metaphorically.
Yeah.
And I think that's the type of thing that like even though he's saying things like I'm here for Israel because it's a big job and I got to get this ship right.
Yeah.
And look, I'm only one person. Like I can't go everywhere all the time right now. And like, I got to make sure to feed my children first, you know, and she's like, I totally get that. It makes total sense, but can I have some scraps along the way?
Yeah.
He's like, good Lord, this is who are you? This is amazing. All right, everybody line up here. See this? Yeah. This is some great faith. If you all would just do this, Peter, take notes. Take notes, Peter. Which Peter is the other, Mark's gospel is the other one that records this. So we know Peter did lean in and he did take note that he's like, you know, there's a Phoenician woman. Yeah. Phoenician. Wild, right? Like
Syrian Phoenicia,
but it's
because there's a couple.
There is different. It's always like there's little. It's like where are you from? The southeast or the southwest or the northeast? The north. And you're like, well, I'm from Washington. Oh, okay. So you're from the northwest. Oh, where are you from? Idaho. Is that the northwest or is that the Midwest?
I think that's the picture frame. If the northwest is a picture, Idaho is the frame. It is holding it in together. Anyway,
but it's that region.
One last thing I want to say about this passage, the feeding of the 4,000 thing. And it's not even like textual, critical, secret languages, whatever, not secret. Let me just read this to you. Jesus left there and went along to the Sea of Galilee. He went up on a mountainside and sat down. Great crowds came to him, bringing the lame, blind, crippled, and mute. Many others laid him at his feet, and he healed them. People were amazed when they saw all these people doing the things they couldn't do before, and they praised the God of Israel. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They've been with me 3 days.
3 days. He
went on a 3-day healing spree.
Yep. Wild.
3 full days. A whole camping weekend.
Yep.
Nobody ate anything but what they brought with them, and he's just healing people left and right. He's healing on full auto.
So what that made me think of, and I didn't say this on Sunday, and that's why I'm going to say it now.
Yeah.
Is when Jesus gets to the well with the woman, Samaritan woman, and he asks for some water. And she goes, you have nothing to draw with. And he's like, well, if you knew who I was, you'd be asking me for living water. And she's like, well, tell me where this water's at and I'll go get it. And he's like, and go fetch your husband. And what he gives her is the healing that she's been looking for. And so in my mind, he's sustaining these people on something that is not of this world. And he's revealing himself and providing joy and enthusiasm and refreshment in a way that goes beyond what the appetites of this world would ask for, but heal on a different level. And so that's sustaining them for 3 days. But in the end, they're human. And so he's like, hey, they've been living off this thing, but I'm pretty aware, just like what's his face that needed a nap and a snack when he got suicidal.
Elijah.
Elijah. It's like
19?
I think
18?
it's 18 or 19. A nap and
19.
a snack's always a good idea. And so I think for him, it's like, it's such a cool revealing of like, when you're in it and it's good, it's real good, like real good. And the kingdom of God it's so good that you forget to eat. It's so good that you don't even think about it. And then I love that he takes compassion on him. He's like, I've healed him and now I've left him in the desert. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
When this is such a desert
Which
place.
also sounds exactly like what he does in Matthew 14, one chapter ago, maybe 2 Sunday study halls ago. Maybe we didn't even talk about it. I don't remember.
I don't remember either.
It would have been a while ago because it would have been before the Easter series and all that. Anyway, we kind of glossed over a lot of the feeding of the 4,000 because we already have a feeding of the 5,000 episode. And a lot of it is very similar. The whole communion tie-in with he took the bread and after blessing it, gave thanks and tore it and passed it out. That's identical. Him having compassion on them, him healing sick and whatever. They're like eerily identical.
And that's,
they're in the same gospel. They
absolutely.
happen 2 separate times.
And I think it's because ultimately, and I said this on Sunday and it was my ending point, ultimately those two giant revealings of his ability to take care of our needs are opportunities for you to choose. Did I just follow Jesus for the snack or do I follow him as king? Do I follow him for the rewards or do I choose to see him as more? Because at that point, you're eating something that didn't exist a few minutes ago. And you're eating something that you're going, whoa. I mean, just think about it. Like, who got the real fish? Who got the real bread? Like, was there a difference? Like, did they all look the same? Like, is this cloning? Like, it's just out of nowhere. And in my mind, you all have to choose when you're eating that bread, what is happening? Yeah. Like, what is occurring? Like, I did not see someone come in with a cart of food and all of a sudden there's 7 giant baskets left over.
Yeah.
That's, in my mind, that's where you find yourself. You're in the crowd. And because of the way this chapter feels, Matthew has led you here. These really fancy guys from Jerusalem show up and they're really mad about the amount of times that they're washing their hands. Jesus confronts them about the quality of their heart and lips. Yeah. And then teaches his disciples about what really makes you dirty is actually your inner things, and that comes out of you. And so he basically tells them, guard your heart without saying that. And then it goes to a Canaanite woman that would be considered as unclean as possible by the Pharisees. And Jesus says her heart is as pure as I've ever seen. Her faith is real, and what's coming out of her is because of her faith. And then it goes to the crowds that have to choose. And so in my mind is just a beautiful chapter.
One last thing I would say.
Yeah.
We've dug into, between chapters 14 and 15, 5 different stories. Maybe we put them in the same episode. We've dug into 5 different stories. But the thing about the 2 feedings, which are so similar, it should not only cause you to be like, wow, it wasn't a one-time thing. He could do this at any moment.
Yep.
But also should cause you to look at the structure of the stories between those brackets. Mm-hmm. So in Hebrew, no, I'm not going to say that. In a lot of Hebrew and biblical writings, there's a thing possible called a chiasm.
Yep.
And a chi is just the Greek letter X. But you don't need to think about a whole X. Think about like a greater than sign or a less than sign or whatever, the little sideways caret thing.
Yep.
And what happens is it'll usually point to the middle of the chiasm where there's section A, B, C, B2, A2. So the 2 A's will look very similar. The 2 B's will look very similar. And then C is like the thing
that stands out.
Now, sometimes there are more or less things in that chiasm. Maybe you go all the way to H or something.
Yeah.
But there's a thing in the middle. So the things on the outside are Jesus feeding people. Mm-hmm. The things on the inner side, but not the middle yet, are people expressing faith. So Peter walking on the water with Jesus. Lord, call me out to the water where you are. The Syrophoenician or Canaanite woman saying, Lord, help me, even if I just get the scraps from the table. What's in the middle? That which defiles.
The faith.
What comes out of your mouth is what defiles you, not what goes into your mouth. Ugh. I love the way all those work together. So cool.
It's really cool. And here's the fun thing. You're eating faith bread, right?
Yeah.
Like you're putting this into you as you're eating this like miracle bread, but at the same time where your heart isn't changed by putting that miracle bread in. Like it's not like it transforms you, which I think would have been hilarious because they would have probably said, this bread, it could change it. I didn't change anything. Dang it. Maybe it'll supercharge me. I'll have faith powers now. But no, they still have to choose and their hearts still have to. And I love that you pointed that out. I hadn't even thought about that. That's worth the whole podcast.
I was like, why are they so identical?
That's wild. Well,
it's just,
I love this discussion. I hope it was helpful to you, and I hope that it encouraged you in some way. If you have questions or thoughts or things that we missed or things that you loved, always leave a comment or send Ryan an email. As always, subscribe or leave a review. It helps the podcast move forward. Share it with a friend. Shout outs. I know we got a lot more listeners now. Dustin, I'm looking at you.
And Zach.
And Courtney.
Yep. And Mommy.
And all the moms. The moms.
I shouldn't have said Mommy. I really regret it.
Hey, as always, have a great and glorious day in the Lord, and we'll see you later.
See ya.